Material for the brain. Conversations for thinking bodies. In this show, together with our guests, we explore different ways in which we can develop a meaningful relationship with our bodies and minds and respond to the current state of the culture in a quest for more integrated and embodied perspectives.
Hello and welcome to Material for the Brain podcast. It's been a while since I've been releasing any content, and it's partially due to the summer break that I took, and it continued due to the unfortunate events that has been taking place in my home country, in Israel. And today I've decided to release an episode to the podcast that is not directly connected to, let's say, the mission statement and the area of exploration that the podcast is typically focusing, but I've decided to release new content that is directly relating to the political situation in Israel, which is something that is very different in its nature than what I'm typically covering and discussing here in the podcast. So first, I would like to advise any one of you that is not interested in listening to my thoughts about what is happening right now in my country in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course, to just skip this episode because, again, it's not going to be about the typical embodiment and life, so to speak, conversation. I would like now to give you a little bit of context for the release of this episode. I have initiated opening up a space for conversation with people who are interested to speak to me, specifically because I am from Israel. And I've had so far 2 conversations. This is the second one. The first one I haven't shared on the podcast, but it's available on my Facebook page. Initially, I didn't intended to release it on the podcast, but after having the second conversation, I realized that it might be of value for people to also listen it here. I am intending to continue the normal release of episodes, but that will happen only later on. So in the next few weeks, I will probably release more episodes than often around this topic. And if you are curious, you are very welcome to stay with me. I would also say that if one of you, the listeners, is curious to talk to me about this topic, I'm very open to discuss it with anyone, regardless of your political intuition or what do you think about the situation. I'm just generally interested in listening, exchanging, and dissecting the situation through the medium of conversation. So in this second episode that I'm doing around the topic of the conflict in the Middle East, I'm talking with Johannes Stolba, who is a colleague from Vienna. He actually asked me to be a conversation partner. And another thing that is quite different than the typical episodes, that I'm not really acting as the host. In this episode, actually the role were reversed, and Johannes was the one who was asking questions and leading the conversation, and I was answering and sharing my perspective. That doesn't mean that this will be like this in future episodes, but in this specific one, that's how we have decided to initiate it. So again, if you're listening to the whole conversation and the urge to converse awaken inside of you, you're welcome to write me an email or to contact me on social media. I would just really appreciate if you also write what's your intention and why do you have the wish to converse with me. And that's mainly due to the fact that it's also very tough emotionally. It's not a topic that is just theoretical. It affects my life directly, and I want to still choose with who do I engage, and understanding why you want to engage with me helps me with that decision. Having that said, I hope you will benefit and enjoy this conversation. I think it's very important, definitely for my own, let's say, ethnocentric perspective at the moment. So without further ado, here is the latest episode for your pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Matan, for initiating. I very much liked your idea of initiating conversation around the topic, because we tend to post stuff on Facebook, which I actually didn't do during the last weeks, but normally I also have spent too many hours on Facebook commenting and posting, and I liked your idea very much to just have a meaningful conversation instead.
Yeah, maybe you know, again, I don't want to be really the host, but maybe it is nice just that you take a moment just to tell everybody who you are, and like maybe you can also show the context how we know one another.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Johannes Stolba. I'm a psychotherapist in training. Formerly, I worked in the field of information technology, and yeah, we know each other because we have been dance partners in various occasions and settings. And yeah, as I said, I liked your idea of opening a conversation around Israel, and also I did a lot of reading recently, sparked by the recent events on 7th of October, and so I felt also the intention of taking this offer from you and accepting it to have some conversation.
Cool. Yeah. I appreciate that, and I must say that for me, like on a personal level, it's really strengthening that people wants to talk to me, and I don't care if we agree or disagree, but to see that there are people that are willing in good faith to converse with me, that gives me hope, and I thank you for that. And yeah, I don't know, do you want to kind of carry on leading a little bit with some questions that you have in mind, and we see where it goes?
Fine, yeah. Yesterday, in preparation for the talk, I wrote down a couple of questions, and then today, there popped up another article of this French. It's an interview with the French. I don't know what role he had, but Dominique de Villepin. Maybe you heard him already. No, I think during the time of Jacques Chirac, he was like foreign minister or something of France. And he gave an interview recently, a couple of days ago or yesterday, I'm not sure. And there he says some things which strongly resonate with me. So maybe we start with that, because he also, that's a point that also came to my mind during the last days. And he also mentions it, that Israel actually had not a very positive attitude towards the Palestinian leadership in general, seemingly during all the most of the time, probably of the since 1948, and oftentimes wanted to get rid of the leaders, of the Palestinian leaders, somehow, some way or the other. So maybe we can start with this question: How does this situation look from your point of view? Would it have been wiser from your point of view to continue with peace process, like from Oslo onwards, and to really try to cooperate with some kind of Palestinian leadership, rather than to somehow try to murder them, or try to get rid of them, or try to finance their opponents, like Hamas, for instance, in the early days after Yasser Arafat passed away?
So first I want to say that I'm far from being an expert when it comes to the history, and I want to tell everybody who is listening to know that I might be wrong about many things, and that's why that's why I would try to share my perspective more like principles of thinking about the conflict rather than to be like anecdotically precise with the facts, because I might get them wrong, and that's not gonna help anybody. So yes, in principle, I'm more for conversing with leaders of opposite opinion than murdering them. That's as a principle, I would say. Now, within this statement, I think there are certain boundaries that I think that are maybe good to share. So if we talk a little bit about the history and of the establishment of the Palestinian leadership, you mentioned Yasser Arafat, and maybe that's kind of a certain point that I am aware of the details of the history that is good to mention, that the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Movement, was founded by Yasser Arafat in 1964, which is 3 years prior to the 6 Days War, in which Israel occupied the entire state of Israel and part of Egypt and the Golan Heights, and also areas that were East Jerusalem that were in Jordanian control. And 67 marks the day of the beginning of what we call now the occupation, even though that from the Palestinian perspective, the most significant event is the Nakba of 48. So this is like just brief history. Now, why do I mention this 64? Is because the creation of the liberation movement, which for many years were the unelected representative of the Palestinians, it started in 64, which means that the desire to liberate Palestine started before the occupation of 67. So from their perspective, even before they were occupied by Israelis in the territories that we recognize now as Palestine, meaning the West Bank and Gaza, from their perspective, there was a need for liberation of Palestine before this occupation. Hence, the known slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." So this kind of just plays a certain perspective. What does the Palestinian liberation movement was about? And the tactics that Yasser Arafat and the Ashraf is the abbreviation in Hebrew, which stands for Irgun Leshichur Palestine, which again, it's just in Hebrew the same meaning, the Organization for Liberation of Palestine. Their tactics were also during the Intifada were aimed towards military and civilians simultaneously. And for many years, for example, Yitzhak Rabin, which he was the initiator of the Oslo Agreement with Yasser Arafat, there is very famous interview which he says, "I will only meet Yasser Arafat on the battlefield." Eventually, of course, he changed his perspective, and the initiation of the Oslo Agreement took place, and then he was murdered, and some people in the left still kind of hold the perspective that the murder of Yitzhak Rabin was also the murder of the whole potential for peace. So this is kind of a little bit brief history, and I think that the reason why I bring it up is because if we talk about principles, I think there is a certain boundary to what any liberal person can stand for. And that's a very painful boundary to recognize, and I'll try to map what I mean. So I think like if you hold certain liberal values and you see yourself as a human, as somebody who is identify with liberalism, you probably stand for universal human rights. You probably stand for the right for every people to govern themselves. You probably stand for many other things that we can mention right now. And in that regard, you probably also stand for freedom of speech and all the plurality of positions that we can have. So as the famous phrase that I don't agree with you, but I will fight for your right to voice your opinion or something like this. You know what? I'm probably rephrasing it not precisely as the quote goes, but within that freedom, within that kind of liberal position, there is a boundary, which is any actor that decides to be illiberal in their perspective. This is the boundary that liberalism has to enforce. As long as you want to play within the liberal boundaries, you're welcome. But if you are for illiberal principles, we have to say, sorry, you're out. And the obvious example will be like, I don't know, that for example in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, it's illegal to promote Nazi ideology nowadays. No, it's like this. It's really like, I don't know what's the status in Austria, but like that's a very
it's the same. Yeah,
it's the same. No, so that's it's a very clear boundary saying sorry, like freedom of speech, but you're not allowed to go there. And to my estimation, and that's something that again I want to separate between Palestinian leadership and the Palestinians, because it's two different things. First of all, because beside Hamas in Gaza, nobody have ever elected the PLO to be the representative of Palestinians. It wasn't a democratic process that we can treat the Palestinian leadership as in the same way that you might treat the current government of Austria. You can also say the same on Hamas, because Hamas was elected democratically once, and since the first act that they did was to murder the political opposition and to establish a military dictatorship. So again, these are certain boundaries that goes behind liberalism. And if you don't agree with me, there is something wrong with how you think. And I'm not pointing directly to you, Johannes, but to everybody who's listening. So on the level of principle, when we talk about why there is a tension, maybe, and that's kind of a thought experiment. I'm not sure if that was what was going on within the Israeli leadership minds, but from a theoretical point of view, from a principle base, I would say that I can see the problematic. I can see what is problematic negotiating with somebody that doesn't hold similar values but have different interests than you. So if I tell you, look, my mission statement is the destruction of your state and the establishing of my state. That's my mission statement. I want to liberate Palestine from your existence. I'm not interested in my main value is not the emancipation of my people, but the destruction of your people. That's a boundary that any person who is honest with their liberal values will say, sorry, that's not like acceptable. I cannot negotiate with you. So that's from a principle point of view. But sometimes I think that life and principle have tension, and I can understand why Yitzhak Rabin was willing to go into the negotiation table with Palestinians and to try to compromise something in order to achieve a greater good, because it's obvious that you cannot get peace if your highest value is justice. They don't come along together. There is a certain amount of justice that is necessary, because you know, like, I wouldn't want to make peace with Adolf Hitler, but I understand that to some extent I have to compromise my intuition and my sense of justice if I want to promote peace, because you know,
that's may I?
Yeah, of course.
From there,
please feel free to interrupt me, because I don't know.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, that I'm glad you say that about justice and peace, because last time when we had a very brief textual discussion about some incident in our dancing community, it was also partly about justice, and what I remember from that time was what made a strong impression on me was your even bringing up the term justice in that scenario back then. And so I'm very glad to hear that from you now, because that's also my belief. I strongly hold that we have to go partly at least of our concept of very defined, or maybe also because it's always a subjective point of view, and so there's no such thing as justice could be argued on an objective level. And so I strongly agree with you. To have peace, we need to let go of that, probably. Yeah. And very interesting your thoughts about how the Palestinian leadership actually was not a democratically elected one, and also probably not sharing the same values, rather voting for the annihilation of the Jewish state, and so very hard to even get into negotiations. I completely understand. So this thought came up for me during the last days. This someone said it. I don't remember who it was, but like if the daily experience the Palestinians have and the historic narrative they are brought up with and they find themselves in, fit together.
Can you repeat? Can you repeat the last sentence?
They live in. So there was this state from somebody, I don't remember who it was, that basically, if the daily experience of the Palestinians fit together with the historic narrative they are brought up with, like we are suppressed, we are, like from the Nakba on, we have been driven out of our homelands, and we are suppressed, and we have been this oppression from the Jews, etc., etc. That's the historic narrative they are brought up with Muslim. And if that fits, if that suits the daily experience they have, like living in like miserable conditions generally, or what, then it's a strong point of identification. Then identification can go on and is strong. One of those the daily improve of those people, then it's not so strong anymore, probably. It's not so to continue like that, probably. So, and that brings us to the point of maybe that's the chance also with a person or a group of people who don't share your values at a certain point in time, and strongly oppose you, maybe even ask for your destruction. Then this is not like everything human, and like everything on this earth it's not a static thing. You know what I mean? It could change theoretically. So maybe that was also what Yitzhak Rabin realized, or maybe it was also just because he realized that Yasser Arafat was somehow getting into a more moderate position. Whether this was just pure strategy or whether it was wholeheartedly, we will never know, probably.
I mean, I think like that. We cannot know intentions of anybody on the world, because this is an internal thing. But we can interpret the facts and then think. And when it comes to Yasser Arafat, at the end, when he had the opportunity to agree to a peace proposition that was extremely generous, much more than the Yitzhak Rabin position of Ehud Barak, it chose to refuse and initiate the second Intifada. So,
can you just put me, just inform me a little bit around this issue, because I'm not aware of that.
So,
I haven't been aware of that.
Yeah. So I'm not. I cannot pick up exactly the dates right now, but it's something that I invite the audience to Google. But
so it was after the murder of Yitzhak
after
Rabin?
the murder of Yitzhak Rabin, there was a change to a right-wing government afterwards, and then which, if I'm not mistaken, it was Benjamin Netanyahu, or I don't cut me with the details. I was pretty young, and I don't remember that precisely. But when the left-wing party of the Avodah came back to govern the state with Ehud Barak as its prime minister, he reinitiated the peace process. And this was not the was it Oslo, or there was another phase?
Oslo was before. It was the Rabin process.
So I don't remember in which city it took place, but again, Ehud Barak made a proposition that was more generous. He kind of gave, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the control of East Jerusalem and many other things. One of the things that Ehud Barak wasn't willing to accept is the right of return for the refugees back to their original original homes. And Yasser Arafat declined, which of course he has the right to decline because, like maybe he has different position. And basically, like, he chose not to compromise his sense of justice for peace. That's what I would say. Like, so for him, a sense of real justice for the Palestinian would have been a greater offer than what Ehud Barak offered, and he chose not to do that. Plus, he initiated the second Intifada, which to some extent also destroyed the belief in the peace project for many people on the left in Israel. One of the things that happened is that in the Oslo Agreement, Israel agreed to finance and supply the Palestinians with weapons to build up their own police forces. And in the I think it was in 2002, the second Intifada. I was
early
just
2000s,
in 2002 there was the big operation of it started in 2000, I think, and in 2002 Israel reoccupied the West Bank. And one of the things that happened is that the Palestinian police shot on soldiers with the weapon that has been supplied by Israel a few years later. So there was, this kind of was politically, it was a moment in Israel that many right-wing conservative had the intuition, we should have not trusted them, and that's kind of the conservative intuition. Let's not open up for the stranger because he might be dangerous for us. And the left wing kind of have to confront the fact that that there is a problematic that our partner that we want to believe might not be the partner we believe. And now, the 7th of October now, if there was any leftover of people who really believed that we have a partner for peace, that destroyed it completely. And I would say that now probably the percentage of people in Israel that still hold the position that we have a partner for peace is very, very, very small minority. And again, I want to be clear for everybody who is listening. I'm not saying that everybody in Palestine wants me dead. I'm just saying that we don't have partner on the level of leadership that is relevant for peace. Now, if some people are not aware, like Hamas is a much more radical organization than Ashaf, the PLO. It stands on much more strong Islamic fundamentalistic values, and in its core belief is that the land of Israel is a holy Muslim land, and that it's against it's the responsibility of every Muslim to fight a jihadist holy war against the infidel, against the non-Muslim in the land. And it sees Israelis not as settler colonialists, like many people in the West tend to categorize Israel nowadays, but it sees Israel as the infidels, as Jewish people, and they oppose the Jewish presence in Israel, and they believe that murder of Jews is a holy act in the jihadist war of liberation of the state of Israel. Now, if you don't believe me, you are welcome to go and read their founding documents. And And for those people who say like, yeah, okay, this is their founding documents, but it's not really what they believe. There are enough evidence now on the 7th of October to connect between the founding document and what actually happens in reality. And so I personally, I don't believe that there could be any possibility for conversation with Hamas. And having said that, and maybe again, feel free to cut me to interrupt me when you want to, because I'm kind of going with my intuition. I don't have a clear line, but I just want to say that nowadays there's this kind of meme, Hamas is ISIS, that is going on. And I would say that even though that on the level of the brutality of their action, they could be compared to ISIS, from a Muslim ideological point of view, ISIS condemned Hamas as not radical enough, because to some extent they have been willing to negotiate de-escalation of violence with the Israeli government. So the fact that they even initiated some negotiation with a Jewish entity already is an evidence that they are not as radical and fundamentalist in their belief system. So there are levels for like jihadist fanatism, but as far as I'm concerned, that's way beyond the boundary that we've mentioned in the beginning of a liberal conversation. And so I don't have a lot of hope when it comes to what should be done with the leadership of Hamas. And I think it's also good to mention when people talk about oppressed people, that there is a very difference between the leadership of Hamas and, for example, the leadership of Ukraine. Let's kind of just make a very short comparison, in the sense that you can look at this situation and say, hey, look, there is two weaker state in one case, and in the other, not a state, but people who are being constantly attacked by a stronger entity. But when you look at the leadership, what is very different is that the leadership of Hamas is not on the ground. They are in Qatar, they are multi-billionaires, they live very great life in very fancy mansions and hotels, and they are giving commands and order from their safe ground, in comparison to the prime minister of Ukraine, who we had this kind of heroic quote of, don't send me a way out, send me ammunition. As somebody was like, hey, I'm staying here fighting for my people.
He said, I don't need a taxi, I need ammunition.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need, exactly. And the leadership of Hamas, they are not really concerned about the safety of their people, but they see their people as material that can justify their political religious aspirations. That's a big conflict that many Israelis experience right now. Because we are really being criticized as, I don't know if you've seen it, but there is another common meme is like, stop the genocide, that Israel is supposedly is doing for the Palestinians. And from most of the Israelis, and I'm not saying all the Israelis, I would say but the majority of Israel would not agree with that perspective. And they would put more responsibility, I would say that the majority of the people in Israel right now would say that the full responsibility is over Hamas. I would say that there is a shared responsibility about the situation, and that definitely Hamas shares a big of the responsibility of the suffering of the Palestinians, even though that I would say that I'm pretty sure that most Gazan people will still hold more responsibility for Israel than Hamas for their own suffering. And I can also still man their position and think like them.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not fully in agreement with that.
Yeah. Maybe what I want to talk about is I think that radicalization is basically something that can that can happen on the backbone of any religious context, basically. So it probably doesn't matter whether you are Christian, Islamic, or whether you're a Muslim or where you are a Jew. So I think radicalization is basically like a human potential, if you want, that's always there, and of course it needs certain ingredients like well-known things like poverty and lack of opportunities and stuff like that, all of that, and narratives and blah blah blah. But the is practically irrelevant actually in the process. You know, the is called English, not sure, the dwarf, the Christians fought in at least in the 12th century or 13th century or something, in the name of Christ, in the name of the cross, you know.
Yeah.
So and then all this other stuff. So what was if there is radicalization has happened in Israel, in this area, let's say Israel Palestine. If you look back to, let's say, I don't know, 1907 or something, when the first Jewish underground movements started, apparently in this modern times. That's what I read, at least. So from that point on, there's like a continuous development of radicalization happening, at least on the Palestinian side, and partly probably on the Jewish side. I would, in my view, it's more like a back and forth of you know, like when there's a left-wing government, liberal government, and it's goes to the one direction, and then there's a right-wing government, goes again to the other direction, something like that. So what I ask myself is, it's completely hypothetical, and we will never know, of course, but wouldn't it be a wise thing to do if you realize that your partner is not on the same page, like you described in the beginning, concerning your values? You don't have common values. The partner even wants to destroy you. Wouldn't it be a wise thing to do, instead of like just pushing him out across your border, so to speak, and letting him like boil something up, radicalize itself, himself, instead, like forcefully, if necessary, forcefully integrate them? You know what I mean? So to speak, wouldn't it have been wiser in the case of the Israel state to say from the get-go, okay, if you're thinking like that, and if you don't are willing to really be a partner in negotiations, then we simply have, for our own security, have to integrate you if you want it or not, and like occupy the whole territory and just create a Jewish state, where Palestinians can also live, but maybe with certain limitations, so to protect the Jewish state in a way, because that was probably one of the concerns, that if you let that happen, the Jewish state will vanish very shortly after, and then the Palestinians will take over, and then the Jews will be haunted again, I guess. But you could maybe find some clever arrangement so to prevent that, but also to somehow take care of the Palestinians, you know what I mean, rather than just pushing them outside and letting them boil.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. It's actually not that hypothetical, because there are voices who are also politically pushing this idea, and I want just to go one step backwards towards what you said about religion as the base for radicalization. I would say that it's not religion, it's ideology, and the ideology could be embedded in religious thinking, but it can also be embedded in political thinking, hence, National Socialism or communism. And also I would say, and that's something that is important for me to say right now, is that radicalization has nothing to do with left or right. It's just like within left leaning ideologies, or within right leaning ideologies, there are spaces where you are falling into stronger and stronger ideological thinking. Nowadays, and that's kind of my estimation, where you can see a lot of sympathy between the radical Islamistic ideology is more with radicals on the left. It's actually not now, it's been historically like this. You know, you can look at the Baader-Meinhof group in Germany and their collaboration with the PLO.
Yeah.
So like, let's say like this, like if right-wing radicals go about ostracizing minorities, left-wing radicals somehow find common ground with very radical, so to speak, liberation movement, or nowadays even with jihadists. So that's
and maybe just a short interception here. I guess that fact has to do with this identification with the oppressed versus the oppressor. The right-wing people tend to identify with the strong part of the equation, you know, and left-leaning people tend to identify with the weaker part.
And I think that's like, of course, like those values of the left radical ideologies has nothing to do with the values of the jihadists, but the jihadists in this specific context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could be recognized as the oppressed. And now for your question about the integration, this hypothetical integration, and I think this is kind of certain maybe shadow of the Israeli side that I'm willing to kind of talk about and to dive into, because I'm also responsible for that to some extent. So I think maybe it's good to jump in a little bit to 48 and to look at the Nakba / the independence war to understand the context of this question. So when the Zionist movement started to operate and had this vision of building a Jewish state, and the destination has been decided to be this specific part of the world that was back then named by the Britain Palestine, there was a certain urgency to help many Jews to immigrate to the Holy Land. And that plan was interrupted by the Second World War, which literally destroyed the Jewish population in Europe. And there was a serious debate back then within the Jewish leadership, like, what should we do? We don't have enough Jews to bring, because they are all being murdered. And the decision was, are you still with me? I'm sorry, I just...
I'm listening.
Yeah, no, the picture was frozen, sorry.
Okay.
And the decision back then was that they should try to convince Jews from what we call the eastern part of the world, Mizrahi, Jews from Arabic states, to come to Israel. Now, you have to remember that in this context, you're talking about a huge difference between the standard of living of Europeans and people that most of the Jews leadership were European descendant Jews, not all, but most. Some were also like Jews from families from many generations, that goes back many generations in Israel. And they decided to adopt a new plan and to accept many Jews and to encourage many Jews to come to immigrate to Israel. And the push was to generate majority of Jewish people in the land, with the hypothesis that if there will not be Jewish majority, we cannot have a democratic country. Why? Because Jewish people cannot accept being the minority, because that's what they have been trying to avoid, because all the history of the pogroms and the Jewish persecution. So it was clear, like, if something has to be different when we build our own state, is that we have to be the majority in order to make it democratic at the same time. And
to feel safe,
Yeah, so this is kind of the hypothesis. And what happened in 48 is that after the announcement of the creation of the Israeli state, there was a joint effort from 5 Arabic countries, including the Arab population, which these are the people that we will call nowadays Palestinians. Back then, they were not identified as Palestinians. They were part of this kind of bigger Arabic identity. And it's good to understand that all this nation state, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, this is kind of Western invention. There was no national identity that was broken into those territories. This was just like British and French Marshall drawing lines and dividing the land. So there was like an Arabic identity. There was an attempt to create an Arabic state that back then the area of Israel was called the southern Syria. This goes back to the Ottoman time. So basically, there was the leadership of the Palestinian people back then decided to attack the Jewish state. They were joined by the forces of all these Arabic states in an attempt to destroy the state completely and to gain control over the land, not to negotiate for some, for the UN borders or something. The initiate of the war was the destruction of the Jewish state. The aggressive war failed. During the war, there was a request coming from the armies of the Arabic state towards the Arabic population that were living back then in Haifa, in Jaffa, and many other places to evacuate during the wartime, with the idea that after a few days, when we ran through this Jewish state and destroyed it, you can go back to your home. So to minimize the casualties.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So these events led to the withdrawal of around 700,000 people from their homes, who became the Palestinian refugees. Now, beside that, there was also several cases that were kind of very hardly hidden within the Jewish leadership of active deportation and of Arabic villages and territories in Israel. So it was partially the request of the Arabic armies, and partially the direct responsibility of the Israeli leadership to make the Palestinian flee from their home. This is the Nakba. This is what Western people now, people who kind of hold this decolonialization perspective, this is what they call the ethnic cleansing by the state of Israel. Now, it's good to understand that in the context in the context that it happened, it was in the midst of a war. So the Jewish state is being established. Few days after the announcement of the country, there is an aggressive war, and part of the result of the war is that 700,000 people find themselves without homes, and they are spread in different countries. So some of them stayed, and these are the people who now we call Israeli Arabs. Some of them stayed in areas that were controlled by Egypt. This is the whole Gaza Strip. It was controlled by Egypt. Some of them are in the West Bank. This was controlled by Jordan. And some of them went to Lebanon and Syria. Yeah. Now, something that happened simultaneously due to the 48 war is the deportation of 900,000 Jews from Arabic states. So all the Jews from Morocco, from Libya, from Algeria, from Egypt, from Iraq, from Yemen, from many areas around the Middle East and North Africa were deported and arrived to Israel. Now, I'm not saying that we should just treat it as like, okay, we threw 700 of yours, we got 900 of ours, and that's it. It should be equal. It's just to put a context. So when people use the term ethnical cleansing, it's good to look at the facts also, because now in the territory of Israel and Palestine, there are quarter of the population of Israel are Arabs, which are what we call, again, Israeli Arabs, or some of them more identify as Palestinians. It's like a very, very mixed identity, plus another 4 million Palestinians. So within the boundaries of what we call Israel-Palestine,
there is around 5 million Arabic people, which doesn't really equal to ethnic cleansing. But on the other hand, if you look at the numbers of Jews living in Arabic countries, the numbers are very, 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 very low, if at all. So if we talk about ethnic cleansing, so I would say that the Arabic world is much more responsible for ethnic cleansing of Jews than that the Jewish state is responsible for ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Now, another thing that is quite crazy to grapple with, and I cannot understand why is it like that, is that anywhere in the world, there is the UN has a department that is responsible for refugees. And all the refugees in the world have a certain legal status. And the legal status is as following. If I'm a refugee, let's say I ran now from Syria due to war, and I got accepted to live in Austria. When my kids are born and they get Austrian citizenship, I'm not considered a refugee anymore. My kids, I don't inherit them the status of a refugee. That's it. They are not refugees anymore. They are not Syrian anymore. They got accepted. They have relocated into a new place. Now, the UN also has another department for Palestinian refugees, specifically for refugees that are the result of a conflict with the one Jewish state in the world. Now, those refugees can inherit the status of a refugee from their parents. Therefore, 700,000 refugees are now several million refugees. So when people say like there is few million Palestinian refugees, it's you need to understand that many of these refugees are people that are already for 3 generations they are living in Syria, and they don't see themselves as Syrian. They see themselves as Palestinian refugees. And now you can say like, look, Matan, who are you to judge people who wants to come back to their ancestral homeland? Or this is your Jewish history. You've been dispersed for thousands of years, and still you maintain your connection to your indigenous land, and you came back, and that's fair enough. I'm not judging the people. Who I judge is the Arabic states who have been leveraging from that story and didn't integrate.
Yeah, in order to pressure
the Palestinians. Yeah. They didn't integrate the Palestinians. I would even, open up your perspective that, for example, when Palestinian, which are now, if I'm not mistaken, there is like a majority of Palestinian in Jordan, like people who are like kind of in the population. When there was a demonstration and from Palestinians in Jordan, the Jordanian king ordered his police forces to open fire and to just shoot people who demonstrate against his regime. So, so the level of critique that Israel is receiving from the Western world is much, 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 much higher than the critique that we are placing on the Arabic world. Now you can maybe say like, hey, okay, because Israel is supposed to be a democratic country, so we hold them into a different standards of
higher standards
behavior. But it's still curious for me. And for me, and again, like that sounds strange for people, but for me, when I think about this, like why in all over the world there is one status for refugees in all conflict, but there is a specific organization within the UN called the UNRWA that is dedicated for support for the Palestinian refugees. For me, and that's only in the context of a conflict with the only Jewish state in the world. For me, there is a certain cynicist side that really look at the world and say like, look, there is such a rooted anti-Semitism that is also embedded within people who are, so to speak, humanitarian. Because, for example, if you think about, and that's a good example, if you think about the German population who have been living in the territories that were part of that is now Czech Republic before Second World War, that there was a big German part there, if I'm not mistaken. And after the Second World War, Germany had to, the borders of Czech Republic expanded, and many Germans lost their homes. And they eventually integrated some of them in Austria, some of them in Germany, some of them maybe in Switzerland. So they went into areas that would be more related to them culturally.
And it would be unthinkable now to imagine that a bunch of, 100,000 of those German people, let's say Czech descended German speaker, will now start to demonstrate and say, free this region. Like we want to go to our indigenous homes. It would be unthinkable. But that's the standards that we...
I would have Poland in case.
Say again?
Yeah.
You would?
I would have to go to Poland. I would have to go to Poland in that case.
Yeah. So for me, it's
my land back.
So for me, it's a little bit unthinkable. And again, like, if the case would have been that Israel would have started an aggressive war and would actively throw hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, I would say, look, now we are talking about historically on a different situation. And this is where the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative goes completely different. Because when you talk with an average Palestinians, and I have spoken, for them, the Nakba is ethnic cleansing. For them, like, we have been thrown from our homes. We after the war, and that's something that we have to say, that what the Israeli army did is that when people tried to come back after the war finished, the Israeli army shot close to them to make sure that if you're coming back, we're gonna open fire. So that's true. We actively prevented them from coming back.
And there were, like you already mentioned, some acts of hostility were there for sure from the Israeli army.
Of course, we are not the Jewish people are not angels, and in times of war, nobody is an angel. And there's many atrocities that we have done over the years, and I don't want to portray a picture of some kind of angelic people who are just promoting peace. No, we did a lot of very aggressive and violent things. In my perspective, I cannot say that this was a morally justified action to do from a humanitarian perspective to prevent those Palestinians to come back to what was their home. But I cannot judge history on the values that are present now. In 1948, the whole idea of universal human rights and moving away from your ethnocentric identity into a more humanitarian identity, that was not the popular perspective that people around the world were embedded. This was the era of nationalism. People were embedded completely in their ethnical identity. In Europe, it was the end of Second World War. It was not, nobody would have treated Germans as, they're fellow humans. We were all embedded in ethnocentric perspective. So now in 2023, looking at it and say like, hey, why this Jewish leadership couldn't see the Palestinian as just fellow human beings? Well, it wasn't the values of those days. It was like, it's just, there is something very pretentious in like thinking about the values you're embedded right now in the culture and projecting them into the past, and just saying like, hey, if I was there, I would be fight for human rights. No, you wouldn't. You would experience yourself as in that case, as a Jew or as a Palestinian, and you would see the other side as not you and as others. And that's, and maybe there was some minority of progressive thinkers who already have seen the next step of potential cultural evolution, but that wasn't the majority. And so, yeah, that's a long answer. And I think that nowadays, again, like, and like maybe just to expand a little bit on the tension, because many people say like that the tension is between, Israel is considered a Jewish democratic state, and many people say like, hey, that's a contradiction in and of itself, Jewish and democratic. But I would say that
that's actually my next question.
Yeah,
do you consider Israel a religious state?
If you enjoyed the conversation so far and found it meaningful, please consider to share the episode with others and to click the like button. These small actions might seem meaningless, but they are the fuel that helps the podcast project to move forward. Your attention and time is highly valued, and we would love to hear more about the insights you might have from listening to this episode. And please consider to subscribe to the channel to be notified for all future uploads.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll expand on that. So first, Judaism, you can argue very strongly that it's both an ethnic identity and a religion. Now, those who are ideologues and they want to promote, let's say, a pro-Palestinian perspective, they would say, hey, Judaism is not an ethnical identity. It's just a religion. So why would you want to have a state for a religion? Like these Jews can, go back to, if they're German Jews, they should be in Germany. If they're like, why would they have even the right for a state? But you can also have very strong argument for why Judaism is also an ethnical identity. And that's maybe something that is quite unique about the Jewish identity, because in most countries, I actually don't know even one other religion that is also ethnical identity. But, if you think about Islam, you can be an Arabic Islamic person, you can be an Islamic person who is like a Russian.
Many variants.
Yeah, same with Christianity, same with Buddhism. But in Judaism, it's different. And that's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because to some extent, if I don't believe in practicing the Jewish religion, I can, from a Jewish perspective, I can say, hey, I'm not a Jew, I'm just an Israeli. But from the Jewish perspective, they say, like, sorry, you're a Jew, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But the biggest tension, I think, within the state of Israel is a tension that we also experience now in many, many European countries, is a tension between liberalism and democracy.
Conservative.
No,
go on, yeah.
So I will repeat the tension between liberalism and democracy. So we have this unified ideas that we call like a liberal democracy, but there's a certain inherited tension. And the thoughts that I'm going to share are coming from an Israeli thinker that I'm following, that now, of course, I forgot his name, but I will try to remember while we speak. There is a podcast that I'm following that it's in Hebrew, otherwise I would reference it here. Anyhow, so democracy in basically is the governing of the demos, of the people. No, so pure democracy, let's say, is where the majority rules. But we know that this has potential catastrophic outcomes. And liberalism is in principle, like I really minimize it, is the protection of the legal protection of the weak, no, like human rights. So there's a tension there, because like if you really want to protect the minorities, you have to some extent limit the power of the demos. You have to limit the power of the governing body. Yeah. So you compromise a little bit of democracy in order to arrive to liberal democracy. And that's the inherited tension within the Israeli state. So we say, like, look, in order for the protection of the Jews, we know that they cannot be the minority because, and that's a conservative perspective that says, look, we know what has happened in the past. Let's not open for the possibility of something new, because again, the progressive perspective will say, like, hey, maybe if we try it differently, there could be a possibility that we are minority, but nobody hurts us. And the conservatives' position will say, like, no, we have done it enough. We're not going to try that. So we have to compromise certain democratic principles. So we will not allow everyone to participate. So we are compromising democratic principle, because democracy will be that everybody who is part of the state is welcome to participate in the democratic in the democratic process. So we will limit that in order to prevent potential catastrophe for those who are now the majority. So it's like it's a liberal intuition that is extended to the future. You understand what you're following me? Because of course, like now when Jews are a majority, you can say, like, hey, look, there's no, you should not be protected. You're the majority. You should protect the minority. But the Jewish intuition is expanded into the future, saying, like, hey, we know what has happened in the past, so we don't want to get there. So then, like, if you say, like, if I go back to the original question, why don't you just kind of say, okay, like, let's just get, like, we don't care about the Palestinian leadership. Let's just reoccupy the whole space. We enable people to participate in the economy, but we limit their participation in the democracy. I would say that many Arab Israelis probably feel like that already. Okay, we have the freedom to be part of the Israeli economy. We are studying in the universities.
But it's not possible to leave Gaza.
Sorry,
and get into Israeli. The internet is bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Do you hear me now?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. How is it actually at the moment, or before, let's say before October 7th? How was the situation for a Palestinian living in Gaza? Could he go to Israel and do business there?
Yeah. So first of all, yeah. So there is a very big legal difference between somebody who has an Arab ethnicity but Israeli citizenship, and somebody who has an Arab or Palestinian ethnicity and it doesn't have
refugee.
And doesn't have Israeli citizenship, and they could be people who were refugees from Jaffa and Haifa and other city, but it can also be people who have been for generation living in Gaza. So as far as I'm aware, and here I really I will probably not be correct with the facts, so just for everybody to know. Before 7th of October, there was some limited possibilities, and again, that's what I'm aware, but maybe I'm wrong, for people in Gaza to get permission to work in Israel. Okay. Where in the West Bank, it was much more common for Palestinians to get work permission to work within Israel. Now, if you ask yourself, why would they even want to work in Israel, is because of the economical differences between Israel and Palestine. Israel has a much stronger economy. So if you work in Israel and you earn shekel, Israeli shekel, which is the currency in Israel, it's worth much more in Gaza. So it's a little bit like...
Could you also settle there then, buy land, buy a flat?
No. So basically, it's a little bit like somebody from, I don't know, Eastern Europe that comes to work in Vienna. Let's say like many people who are like working in construction, they just come to work here, but they don't live here in Austria. So of course, it's not exactly the same, but like from an purely economical point of view, that's pretty similar. So I live in Gaza, I got myself permission, I go to work and I come back. Now the differences is in what I will say the level of experience and like the legal possibilities. So when you come from Poland to work in Austria, you don't go through checkposts, nobody check who you are. And also legally, if you want, you have the possibility to live in Vienna. No? So if you don't want to leverage on the economical differences, you can just choose, I'm just going to move and make my life in Vienna, and that's fine. You're welcome to do that.
So, but then if they're able to live in Israel, to buy a flat and live there, then what did you mean by saying that they are actually already a part of Israel?
Yes. Okay. No. So yeah. Okay. So maybe
the point where I
got confused. You. Yeah. Sure. So again, I'm differentiating again between Israeli Arabs who are legally has the exact same right that I have. They can vote. They can buy land. They can and they are very integrated in our political system. The last coalition before Benjamin Netanyahu, we had a joint coalition that there were Arabs in the government. There was a joint Arab party that formed the coalition with actually quite right-wing nationalists. So strange political moment in Israel. And they are very integrated in the legal system. There are many judges that are Arabs. They are very integrated in the medical field. There are many, many Arab doctors and nurses and pharmacists. So they're quite integrated. Now, of course, there is a lot of discrimination. And, and that's kind of, Israel is not different than anywhere else. There's also a lot of discrimination in Austria or in the United States or in many other Western countries that are legally not discriminating. There's still discrimination on the ground. So there's a gap between the legal status and the culture. So in Israel, those Israeli Arabs have the same legal status like me. And actually, funny anecdote, the Ehud Olmert, which was a Jewish prime minister, part of the Likud, he was sent to jail because of corruption. And one of the judges who were sending him to jail was an Arabic person. So, so the accusation of Israel, that Israel is an apartheid state, are very ideologically driven. You can say that the way Israel governs the Palestinians has could be described more as an apartheid regime or apartheid policies. Because again, legally in Israel, you cannot find anything in the books that will discriminate Arabs. And again, of course, the gap between the legal status and the culture is present in many countries. And I would say that that's something that we, Israel, we should work to better ourselves, that we really see Arabs as fellow citizens. Now, the problem is, and that within the Arab population in Israel, there are many who identify first and foremost as Palestinians. So they are born in Jaffa, they have an Israeli passport, but they see themselves from an identity point of view, I'm Palestinian. And I happen to be conquered by the Jewish people. And now I find myself living in this country. But again, from an economical point of view and from a humanitarian point of view, you will find it hard to argue that it's better for Israeli Arabs to move to the West Bank or to Gaza. Economically, there's no doubt. And I would say that also from a humanitarian point of view, there's no doubt. But still, on the level of identity, like if you feel I'm Palestinian, you're in an internal conflict. And that's very unfortunate. Now, there is another area that is called East Jerusalem that has its own particular legal status, which is quite problematic.
Circumstances.
That some people in East Jerusalem, they don't have an Israeli passport. They just have a certain ID card that is kind of... and this is like a really weird legal status. I'm not really aware exactly on the details, but there are some problems there that needs to be rectified. And what is really interesting to see nowadays is that there is a growing number of voices within the Arab Israeli population who are trying to dismantle the Palestinian identity. And they say, hey, I'm Arab and I'm an Israeli. I believe in Western values. I believe in democracy. I believe in capitalism. I believe in freedom. And I just want to be integrated in Israel. I'm going to serve the army. I'm going to, really trying to strip themselves completely from this Palestinian identity. And they want to say, hey, Israel is a democratic country and I'm just part of this country. And I happen to be from a minority group, but I'm being protected legally and that's it. Now, these are, I would say, still the minority of Arabs in Israel, but it's interesting that these voices are becoming stronger. And there is one specific guy called Yusuf Khaled, if I think I pronounce his name correctly, that he has been extremely vocal on social media, going completely against Hamas and the Palestinians. And he from the Israeli perspective, he's the nice Arabs that we want on our side, who says hey, the Jews are correct, in this kind of binary battle, who is the good and who is the evil. He's the ultimate player. I would say on the other side is there is an American organization called Jewish Voices for Peace that they are they are anti-Zionist and they are completely pro-Palestinian. So it's just interesting to see how rich the landscape of ideas and identities and how complex it is, and that it's really, really far from having a unified voice.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I would say in principle, again, the Israel is first and foremost the state for the Jewish people, and then it's a democratic state for all the people who are living there. And there are other minority groups, not only Arabs. There are Druze, there are Bedouins, there are different minority groups, ethnical minority groups. And I think that, if you would have asked me this question before the 7th of October, I might have answered you that Israel is first and foremost should be a democratic state, and second, it should be the state of the Jews.
But the event of the 7th of October have awakened inside of me a very strong ethnical part that was buried under
feeling,
a higher humanitarian perspective that I'm just a human in the world. But confronting the level of direct anti-Semitism and subtle, more slippery anti-Semitism that I feel around me makes me feel like, actually, it's very good that we have a Jewish state first and foremost, and then we can welcome those who believe in the values that we believe to be our neighbors and partners and to integrate. Even though that legally, and that's another thing that I just want to share with you. I don't know if you're aware of it. Many people look at it as some kind of a ethnic discrimination that if you're a Jew that was born in the US, you can come to Israel, you get a passport, you get some financial support, and you can immigrate to Israel. But if your grandfather was Palestinian, you cannot do that. And that's true. And then some people look at it and say like, yeah, it's like ethnical discrimination. And I would say that, like any country that I know in the world has some form of ethnical discrimination of who they are willing to welcome to become their citizen. Some countries don't do it based on ethnicity, but some countries do. Austria, for example, I cannot become an Austrian. I don't have a right to be an Austrian unless my parents are Austrian. So if my parents would have been born in Austria, but they would have immigrated to the US, and I would be born as a US citizen, I would still be able to claim Austrian passport because of my parents are Austrian. So it's still based on this aristocratic principle. France is different. In France, you need to be born in the country, and I can go there, my wife can give birth to our kids in Paris, and that's it. They will get French citizenship. So I wouldn't say that Israel is doing something differently. It's just that the discrimination is based on the Jewish ethnicity that again is some
identity.
And that's something that again, like the people who are really opposing vocally Israel, they use this also as a card to kind of portray Israel as some kind of a atrocious country that discriminate based on ethnicity. But most countries in the world are doing it, and I don't see people like vocally shouting on the Austrian discrimination of all the non-Austrian who might want to potentially live in Austria.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thanks for that answer. It really opened some new perspective for me. What you said about democracy and liberal democracy and to how it plays out in Israel. You which is repeatedly with you're talking about anti-Semitism, and that's maybe a point where we disagree, or where I at least have some problems with that notion that everybody who is opposing or criticizing Israel as a state or the state actors is automatically anti-Semite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what a little I heard from you mentioning that twice. So actually, during the last days since October 7th, I heard that a lot on the mainstream media and stuff, that like it immediately gets into population battle, like you also said, and where everybody who has some critique about either recent Israeli action or past Israeli actions or whatever, but is automatically called anti-Semitic. And you have repeated that from your own perspective. You said that you feel like there's a rise of anti-Semitism, or there is a lot of anti-Semitism that you observe. So how do you respond to that? If I tell you that actually for me this is quite dissatisfying, because I want to be able to criticize a state like Israel the same way than any other state, like US or my own state, or and without being judged as being anti-Semite, because it's a completely different thing. It's not on my mind at all. I'm identified with with any ethnicity, and they would like to discriminate Jews or something like that.
Yes, of course.
So how will we see that?
I'll try to map a little bit the boundaries as far as I can see. I just want to jump back quickly for reference.
Maybe just a technical thing, Matan. Yeah. Are you able to turn down the volume of your mic, because it's a little bit overdriven? It sounds a little bit like a distorted guitar amp or something. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry. I'm also monitoring. Maybe you can lower a bit the volume, because I'm also monitoring the sound of the microphone while we speak, and I know that if you have
I know it's not too loud in the ears. The signal. Sound microphone would be too much for the input, but never mind.
If it's difficult. I'm aware of it, but in the recording from my side on the file, it will sound loud enough, so that's why I keep it like this. But I know there is a certain problem here. Okay. So yeah, sorry. So just for the reference, the person I was mentioning before is called Dr. Micha Goodman, and is a part of a podcast called the Party of Thoughts. That's the name of the podcast. For Hebrew speaker who are listening, it's called Mifleget HaMachshavot, and I can really recommend listening to this podcast. Great thinker. Okay, so let me try to respond to the question about the difference between valid critique and anti-Semitism. First of all, on a principle level, of course, it's very stupid to say that every critique on Israel is anti-Semitic. That would be logical fallacy. It will be to say that it will be similar to say that every critique on a person who happened to be black is immediately racism. You know, like that. If you think like that, and I'm pointing out to people who are listening, if you think that that we are not allowed to criticize each other because that will be racism or sexism or whatever, then you're already embedded in this kind of identity politics, which I have a big resistance and of opposition to. I think that, on the level of ideas, we should have the ability to converse in regardless to our own identity. We are allowed to converse and to think and to criticize people from different identity groups and people from different ethnicities and citizenship. Now, I think that the critique and the anti-Semitic sentiments that I feel comes from what I will call what we could categorize as the decolonialization discourse. And not everybody who criticizes Israel believes in that kind of perspective or stand behind this kind of perspective. So let's do it shortly. What is this decolonialization perspective? So this is a stream of thoughts that you can kind of generally categorize that emerge from postmodernism. It's also emerged primarily in the US, and it comes to criticize the colonial sins of the West. And just a moment, the door here got open. Just a moment. Hey, I'm back. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no problem.
Oh.
I just a glass of water.
Now I have a bit of a problem with my own. Can you speak for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Sorry. Yeah. And again, I'm saying it in a very, very simplified manner, but that could be a good entry. So decolonialization, a stream of thoughts that is looking for power imbalances and looking to expose colonial thinking and etc., etc. And one term that is embedded in this stream of thought is the term settler colonialism, that is to describe the act of an imperial force to send settlers into a new territory, to colonize the territory, to ethnically change the balances, and to exploit the indigenous people, and to to benefit the imperial power, no?
Take ownership of the land.
Of the land, yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Now, you can apply this discourse on the establishment of Israel, but you will have to do certain intellectual fallacies in order to really look at the situation like this. Now, if I'm trying to steelman this position and kind of say, so you can look at the Zionist as a European colonial movement that has arrived to the state of Palestine, and through means of power and colonial and imperial support of the British people, they've managed to overthrow the local population. And since 1948, they have built up a settler colonial state called Israel, and they are occupying the indigenous Palestinians. So that would be kind of, in short, the decolonialization narrative, which for me is anti-Semitic. And that would be for me the boundary between a legitimate criticism on Israel and an illegitimate criticism on Israel. And why is it legitimate and illegitimate? And maybe I should also unpack why do I think it's anti-Semitic. I don't know. I guess that would be a necessary step. But in principle, as long as you agree that the Jewish people deserve the right for self-determination in their historically indigenous land, then we are in a place that you have the freedom to criticize Israel, because in your base belief, you still think that Israel should exist. And then we can talk about the two-state solutions, and we can talk about many things. But if you come from the decolonialization discourse, in principle, you think that the establishment of Israel is a criminal act. And you don't believe that the state of Israel should exist. And the problem with that way of thinking, and that's why I think it's anti-Semitic in its core, is first, it's really inaccurate historically. And second, it gives permission for violence that is directed towards Jews, not towards Israelis at the end of the day. Hence, you could have seen, like students, American students shouting, "We want Jewish genocide." Quite curious days. So this is the boundaries. And now, like, why would I say that it's inaccurate historically? Because, like the Zionist movement was not a movement that was supported by imperial forces. On the opposite, it was the Jewish population in Israel. At a certain moment, they initiate a very bloody resistance against the imperial power of Britain.
British power.
Yeah. Now there were moments, because again, the British, people when people say, like, who did the British favor, the Jews or the Arabs? No, they favor the British. They did what was good for Britain first and foremost. And in those days, Britain was towards the establishment of Israel. Britain was fighting in the Second World War.
Was it called the Yishuv in the early days, or the Haganah already?
Yeah,
I don't know.
No. The word Yeshuv means the settlement.
The settlement.
The settlement. Yeah. And Haganah is the
defense.
The defense was part of the like a kind of paramilitary group. There was a few of them: Haganah, Etzel, and Alechi. There was like three big paramilitary groups that were comprised of different political affiliation. Haganah was related more to the, let's say, kind of the socialist.
And they actually killed quite a couple of British.
They had a very
British occupants. Yeah.
They had a very, very aggressive militant strategies against the British forces that were like bombing. But again, like if to be fair, they never targeted directly civilians, but they were attacking like military and police bases of the British people in order to fight them. So
It's the beginning of the book I read during the last days. It's called how's it called? Rise and Kill First by Ronan Bergman, and it's about, it starts basically in 1907 with the formation of this Lehi underground movement and all the actions it took.
And there was a really strong ideological opposition between the Lehi and the Haganah. There was even a case that Haganah forces bombarded a ship that was brought from Europe with the Lehi leadership.
Lehi leadership,
and that was kind of the really big ideological differences between Menachem Begin, who later became the first prime minister of the Likud.
The baseline we could say is that the formation of the Israeli state was not exactly by the, like, because it was favored by Britain, but just because they were bold and carved it out for themselves, basically.
So during these years, from the occupation of Britain on the area and up to the establishment of Israel, there were different agreements and different the British negotiated different agreements with different people in the land in order to favor their own interests. And one of the agreements they did was with I forget now the name of the family. There was a big Arabic family that they promised them to create an Arabic land that will continue from Egypt all the way into Iraq, and it will be a big Arabic state. That was one agreement that the British did. Another agreement they did was the Balfour Declaration, that they promised the Jewish people that they will give them the possibility to create a Jewish independent Jewish state in the land of Israel. They also made agreement with France, and eventually they divided what the British did was to allow the French to take the territories of Lebanon and Syria nowadays, and they took another. So eventually the British didn't favor not the Jewish nor the Arabs, they favored the French. And they did a big, there's a lot of the mess in the Middle East could be pointed back to how the British governed the land while they had what's called the British mandates. And again, like you can argue that, look, the way the Palestinian leadership in the area of Israel, the way they negotiated with the British in comparison to the way the Jewish leadership was negotiated with the leadership, and a big part of it was a guy called Chaim Weizmann, who was a Jew that had a British Jew that was really influencing and pushing for that the Jewish people managed to negotiate better, and they were more willing to compromise stuff. They said, like, and in their strategy, it was like, we will take as much as we will get, and we will first establish the state, and then we will try to see what happens. Well, the Arabs were like, we will really not compromise our vision, and we will push for the vision. And at the end, what happened is that the Israelis, in the UN declaration, they got a certain amount of the land, and Arabs got a certain amount of the land. The Jews accepted it, the Arabs leadership didn't accept it, and then we ended up in the 48 war. So again, like if I go back to the initial question, I would say like that so this is one first critique about the decolonization narrative, that Israel is kind of, that the Jews, the Zionist movement is kind of a imperial force, which is obviously not. Yeah. And if you do hold that like, again, it's like you're pushing your ideology on the reality. The second thing is that if we talk about who is indigenous to the land, every archaeological digging in this specific land brings back artifacts that could be dated into the David kingdom, which was the original Jewish kingdom in the land of Israel. Now, the Arabs did conquer the land at a certain point during the Arab, and again, like it's somewhere in Muhammad was established Islam, I think something around I think 700, but maybe I'm wrong.
700,
maybe 400, 700. But King David, the Jewish independent kingdom of King David dates before the born of Christ. So then at a certain point there is an Arab empire that conquered this whole land, and the land was shifting between different empires, and at a certain point, the last empire that held the land
was the British. So if you're really being honest for the idea of indigenous people returning to their indigenous land against colonial imperialism, then you should support the Israelis. Now, where the problem comes is that, okay, look, it's always like, what is the time frame that you're looking? If you look at like, if you look like 5 generations backwards, so there was a majority of Arabs and minority of Jews. But if you go more in time, you can say, look, but we were here before. And this is kind of endless conversation. At the end, I see that like both the Palestinians and the Israelis are indigenous to the land. You can, and it doesn't matter for me, many Israelis will bring the argument, hey, the Palestinian identity was only born in 64 by Yasser Arafat. Before that, they were just part of the Arab people, and they have other Arab countries. Why should they be here? I don't go with it. At the end of the day, I'm very pragmatic. There are like 4 million Palestinians now in the land. Any solution that will deny them the possibility to write there will be, will have to go way beyond the liberal principles that I believe. So we have to find some kind of a compromise and live together. That's my perspective. At the same time, I do believe that like forming one big state that will be like, just let's call it the state of this region will not work, because there's like such different cultural values and so much ethnical tension that I don't think that it's going to work. Even though on a utopian vision, there are many. I lived in an Arab village for a few years before I moved to Austria, and like I can get along with many Arab people. I'm not. I don't think that there are any. At the end of the day, people are people. But I think that due to the complicated history, it will be quite problematic. So again, what is the right frame to criticize Israel? First, to acknowledge that the Jews has the right for self-determination in their historically indigenous land, like any other people in the world. And if you don't think like this, sorry, my friend, you're anti-Semitic. If you manage to accept this and say, look, I understand this, the establishment of Israel was very problematic and very traumatic for the Palestinian population, but that's the history and that is what is happening now. Then I think that your critique is valid, and you can say, look, I criticize the policies of the state of Israel, I criticize how they approach the Palestinian, but I don't criticize their existence. But there's a slippery slope here, and I see many people nowadays, and that's kind of where I'm kind of very boiling with my critique, is that I see a lot of people that find it very difficult to publicly criticize the atrocities of Hamas, but are extremely vocal about what is happening, what the bombardment that Israel is doing in Gaza. And even though that, and I'm saying it not as something that is like just kind of to free my conscience from guilt, I am feeling the pain of the people in Gaza. I can, even though I'm really embedded now in my kind of ethnical pain, I can stop for a second and really read testimonials. I follow journalists from Gaza. I look at pictures, I look at images, and I feel, wow, if I would have been there with my kids right now, it's horrible. And I feel this pain. And at the same time, I feel like that we have the right to defend ourselves from the military action of Hamas and to attempt rescue the refugees. But what I see around me is many people that are literally, maybe in private, they will tell me, hey, yeah, I criticize Hamas, but publicly they are unwilling to say, look, this is beyond the line of legitimate resistance. It's not about freedom for Palestinians to murder and burn Jews. And actually, on the more extreme voices, you even see people that kind of justify it or even throw things like, for me, if you say something like, hey, what do you expect? Violence brings back violence. For me, man, you're sliding into a territory that is becoming anti-Semitic. And there's a very difference between saying like, look, I'm really supporting the humanitarian struggle of the Palestinian for self-determination. But at the same time, I don't think that this struggle should end up with the deliberate murders of Jews. Now, one thing that you and I'm telling you, but I'm shouting, you have to understand for everybody who's listening, there is a recording that is very telling of a Hamas, how the BBC like to call them militant, even though I think that they are purely like, I don't even have a name for that kind of behavior. that is calling, and this conversation has been taken from because it was on WhatsApp, so it has been monitored and heard in Israel of Hamas person calling his father and talking to him over WhatsApp and telling him, "Hey, Baba, I've just killed 10 Jews." And he's like really excited, telling his father, and his father is like, "Oh, may God protect you." And his mother is telling, "Oh, I wish I was there with you right now." And like there's a big celebration about the murders of Jews. Now, the guy didn't say, "Hey, mama, I killed a bunch of settler colonial Zionists." He's not saying that. He doesn't fight like a post-colonial war. He's fighting a religious war against Jews. So for me, like the disability to criticize it puts you in support of people who are their ambitious is anti-Semitic, is pure hatred toward Jews. And even though you say like, "Hey, I don't hate Jews," that's, like you can say, "I don't hate Jews," but if somebody would say, "Hey, I don't hate Jews, but I'm not against Nazis," that doesn't go along. That's obvious that you cannot say, "I'm not against Jews, but I'm not going to oppose Nazi pogrom," because they have their perspective. It doesn't sit together. So if you cannot criticize Hamas publicly, and for me, it should be so easy to do that. Like you just, and for everybody who have no idea, there are so many video documentation, not of Israeli documentation, of GoPro cameras from Hamas terrorists who are documenting what they've done to Israelis, and it's horrific. For one week I couldn't sleep because of panic attacks at night after watching too many of these videos. If you cannot do this very simple critique, so my friend, you're in a very, very dark territory that could be, again, like intellectually you can kind of have a discourse around it and use a brilliant term like settler colonialism and ethnical cleansing and all this terminology, but on the ground what you're supporting is a group of people who don't believe that another group of people should have the right to exist. That's what's happening in the ground. Now, there are similar voices in the Israeli side. There are very extreme religious settlers who are driven by very similar forces like Hamas. They believe in Jewish superiority. They believe that we have the right to take by force our ancestral homeland, that we are fighting a religious war, and that we as Jews has the right to throw the Palestinians. And these settlers are committing atrocities right now in the West Bank, and our government that has have one party that represent these people, and also our corrupt prime minister gave that one of them to be the responsible for the police forces, so he's the Minister of Interior Security, and he's like promoting that kind of behavior. And that's for me the biggest crime that Israel is committing right now, is not to address Jewish terrorism. And I will call it terrorism, because that's what it is. It's people who are going and shooting civilians in the West Bank, torturing Arabs for no reason, burning houses. And there's no excuse for that. For me, there's just no excuse for going and attacking a civilian for whatever reason. But the state of Israel at the moment is not being governed by these people fully. We are slipping into this very dangerous territory that Israel is starting, that the Benjamin Netanyahu has started to flirt with very extreme forces, but we are not governed by these forces. It's still different. Yesterday I had a very informative conversation with a good friend of mine that I will keep his name anonymous, whose father is part of what is called Rafael, which is a private company that is responsible for development of weaponry. And his father was one of the people who was responsible for the creation of the Iron Dome. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and his father is has direct conversation with the minister of security and with the prime minister, mm-hmm. and with the high commandment in the army. And I asked him,
So what is going on right now? Because he kind of overheard some conversation and his father shared with him certain things. And I asked him, like, what is the emotional state of all these generals? Because I think that for many people nowadays, they see the bombardment in Gaza, and what they imagine is that there are like a few angry Jewish commanders who are like screaming for blood and let's murder Palestinians. That's what they imagine that is happening. But what is happening on the ground is a bunch of super professionals, people who are trying to calculate in the most precise way that you can calculate this horrible calculation of war. How do we compromise between the safety of the hostages, the safety of Israelis who are living close to the areas where Hamas can shoot rockets, the safety of people who are living in close vicinity to Gaza that might be victims of another future attack from Hamas, and the safety of innocent civilians in Gaza. And that's a horrible calculation. Nobody can make a good calculation between this, and every answer that you will come up with will be fucking ugly answer. But then I see people like, screaming like, stop the genocide, ceasefire now, stop the ethnical cleansing, and all these slogans that don't translate at all to what is happening on the ground. And on the ground, you have a bunch of people who are taking impossible decisions. And today, there has been a very good news that IDF soldiers on the ground have managed to rescue one Israeli woman who was a soldier, who was kidnapped by Hamas. And the motivation of the IDF is not to annihilate as many Palestinians as they can. If that was the aim of Israel, all the Palestinians would have been eliminated tomorrow, because we have the capacity to do that. We have crazy Air Force. If we wanted to just kill every civilian there, we would have marched with tanks and Air Force and infantry. We would just murder all the Palestinians. That could have been a reality. On the other hand, we know what Hamas wants to do, because they've just showed us what they want to do. But they don't have the capacity, thank God, to do that. So for me, that's why still morally and intellectually, I stand behind the IDF actions in Gaza. Even though I understand that it's a horrible price to pay on the Palestinian side. And this price, maybe in the long term, will give birth to more Hamas supporters. But that's one of the uncertainties that is being played right now in this horrible game of war that is governed first and foremost by big uncertainty. I don't envy the people who are taking decisions now, because these decisions are extremely difficult. But when I see some kind of a keyboard warrior sitting in their comfort of their house in Europe, knowing that Israel is making a genocide, I'm thinking to myself, you're not even entitled for an opinion, buddy. You have no idea what you're talking about. And principally, I wouldn't say it. I think everybody's entitled for their opinion. But when I say the situation is complex, I'm not saying it in order to deflect the critique on Israel and to continue bombing because I want many Palestinian people to be murdered. No, it's because it's fucking complicated to balance this tension between you have your people that are being held hostage by this murderous organization. You have all the citizens that could be murdered by missiles. You have all the potential people that could be murdered by another attack of Hamas. And at the same time, you have so many innocent civilians there. And I think that when you play war, to some extent, if you don't prioritize the decision from an ethnical perspective, you wouldn't end up in a war. Because when we go into war, that's the point that we say, like, look, we didn't manage to negotiate. We didn't manage to rise above our ethnical impulses. And we ended up in an armed conflict. So you cannot expect, like if I enter now your house and I start attacking you, I cannot expect you to rise into a humanitarian perspective and think about the other side. And I would say that the amount of individuals who can do it, who, we have the Jesus and the Buddhas as an archetype, the person that turns the other cheek, the person that says no to violence. But the amount of people that can really hold this perspective, we can count them maybe on one hand if they even exist. And right now, we are not in a place, in my opinion, to stop fighting, even though that the tragedy that keeps happening to Palestinians is horrible. After we release the hostages, then I think we can speak about, okay, should we press the war against Hamas despite the casualties or not? But that would be another phase. Now it's a phase that we have the potential to rescue people who have been kidnapped. And when I say people, the youngest is 6 months old, the oldest is above 80. So there's a range of people there. We have the possibility to do something in order to bring them back home in safety. And we have the full right to do that. And again, I went into a long rant. I'm sorry. It's way beyond the question you asked me.
Yeah.
But I really felt the need to go there because I feel like, again, when I'm criticizing my European friends, and a few days ago, I made a post that I wrote like a provocative post, which was going with the saying I wrote, there is a meme now that is running, cease fire now. And then I made a graphics on my computer, cease posting bullshit, and I wrote, dedicated to all my European and American friends on Facebook. Yeah. And I threw it out there. And then people started to say, hey, we are not, can't we criticize what is happening? For me, it's not about that. For me, it's about look, you're an observer of a situation that you have really limited ability to understand what is happening. But if you're really on the side of humans, and you really say hey, look, I care for I'm coming from a humanitarian perspective, please go ahead and check in with people who are involved and check how they are and support them. And this kind of support work is not glorious. It's happening behind the scene. It's writing people private messages, calling them, initiating conversation, checking how people feel. But putting a Facebook profile picture with a Palestinian flag or with an Israeli flag or with whatever flag, or putting a cover image that it says a certain slogan, stop the genocide or free Palestine or whatever, that's not caring. That's virtue signaling. It's just showing to the world, I am on this side. And for me, that's fucking pretentious, and I don't give a shit about that. You wanna be involved? Do what we are doing right now. Go and check in with people. Expand your knowledge. Be interested. Dedicated time. That's work. Most of us don't have time to change the profile picture. You get credit very quickly. Another person who is on the right side.
Yeah, it's identification again.
Yeah,
and again on all sides.
Yeah, and for me, I'm gonna be, I'm a very direct person. You already know me from past conversation we had. I'm gonna call it out. And again, today I feel that the conversation that we are having right now is very one-sided, in the sense that I'm an Israeli and I see things from a very specific perspective. And I've already got the critique, hey, maybe you should bring some Arabic person to speak to. This is not a talk show. I'm not a news channel. I'm not obliged to balance things, but I would be very happy to speak to somebody who's Palestinian or somebody who kind of feel like they are more representing the Arabic perspective. If there is such thing as an Arabic perspective, I would be very happy to speak to anybody. And
interesting. Thank you for that explanations on how you come to the feeling that that people are being anti-Semitic when they question the Israeli state as a whole. That's what I understood from your explanation, was that in your eyes it's really the problem if you question the existence of the state, then you really feel like people are anti-Semitic because they deny the right the Jews to have their own state.
and that's the current zeitgeist. Look, yesterday there was an airplane that landed by an airplane that flew from the Tel Aviv airport that had to do an emergency landing in Makhachkala, the capital of Dagestan, which is part of Russia, but it's an Islamic place. There's been a mob. Once the news came that there is an airplane from Tel Aviv, there's been a mob that ran into the airport, went through all the securities, and started to look if there are Israelis, Jews on the plane. I don't know how. All the people who have been there had Russian passport, and they kind of like they didn't find any Jews. I don't want to imagine what would have happened to some miserable people who have been in the mercy of this mob. And that's the reality, that every time that there is an escalation between Palestinian people and the state of Israel, it gives rise for anti-Semitism. That's just, even though, again, you have the right to criticize Israel, that's the reality. So it's really important that while you're holding your anti-Israeli perspective and criticism, to really stand clearly on grounds that object anti-Semitism. Otherwise, you might, like if you find it cool to wear a kafia, which is a desert, what we call here in Europe, desert scarf. If you find it cool to wear one of those, and you march in the street with a Palestinian flags because you think you're like a kind of a radical leftist and you are for the oppressed, and then you shout, from the river to the sea, Palestinian will be free. My friend, you are supporting the grounds, the ideological grounds for ethnical cleansing of Jews. That's what you're doing. And for me, that's not okay. And I hope that I've managed to clearly explain it also intellectually and not just emotionally why I think like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Madan. I think this is a good point to maybe end our conversation because we need to go to bed.
Yes, today. Totally. I think my wife will be proud, but also angry that I'm not joining the plans that we had earlier. But I kind of thought to give an hour, but we are already conversing almost for 2 hours. Cool. I want to say thank you because, like normally I'm kind of in your role interviewing people and I don't often kind of get the opportunity to rant my opinions.
No, it was a pleasure, and it was very insightful and interesting for me. And thanks for the sharing. And I maybe let me say some final words. I just wish for humanity basically to develop past this vicious cycle of identification and trauma, basically, in which we are, many of us seem to be caught. And also the picture that came to my mind was maybe a question that we won't answer tonight, but maybe to put here as an open question is what happen if like a big part of the world would offer to the Jews of Israel to be welcome and to have this of country. Would there be a lot of Jews leaving Israel and leaving the decades of fighting and the decades of being subject to hatred from all sides around them, or would they stay and because the land is they're really so connected to that land, that's also an interesting hypothetical question that came up to my mind. And maybe would there be the more liberal leftist Jews then be attracted to leave the country, or are they also so identified with the land there? But of course that is completely hypothetical and not really to be answered.
No, I think that could be something to think about maybe next time that we converse here in public or also in a private conversation.
Or private, So thank you, Madan.
Thank you as well.
Have a good night.
Good night, and thank you for the time. And hope to see you soon in a more friendly dancing environment. Thank you, my friend.
Me too. Good night. Bye-bye.
If you want to see more precious and insightful moments, make sure to check our short clips playlist. To see longer interviews, check out the full episode playlist just below it. And to be notified for all future videos, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell. See you on the next episode.